The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Deputy Attorney General Thomas Lee gathered his papers. The high-profile police misconduct case had lasted 3 weeks, draining everyone involved. Thomas loosened his tie and took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. After months of preparation and sleepless nights, the jury had finally delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. Thomas wasn't celebrating, though. Cases like these never felt like victories, just necessary steps toward accountability. As an Asian American lawyer in a system that often protected its own, he knew the risks of challenging powerful institutions. Yet his parents hadn't fled a military dictatorship for him to look the other way when justice needed a champion. "Hell of a case, Mr. Lee," called out a reporter from the local paper. "Any comment on the verdict?" Thomas shook his head politely. The evidence spoke for itself. The system worked today. He kept walking, hoping to avoid further questions. The media circus had been exhausting enough during the trial. What Thomas didn't notice were the 2 uniformed officers watching him from their unmarked car. Officer Brian Daniels, a 20-year veteran with 17 complaints in his file, drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Beside him sat Officer Patrick Walsh, younger but equally troubled, with a record of racially charged incidents that had somehow never derailed his career. "There goes our so-called justice system," Daniels muttered, starting the engine. "Let's have a word with our friend from the AG's office." Walsh's mouth curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Yeah, I think Mr. Lee needs to understand how things really work in this town." Inside the courthouse, Maria Torres, a clerk who had worked there for nearly 30 years, was filing the day's paperwork when she glanced out the window. She frowned, recognizing the officer's car rolling slowly behind Thomas as he walked toward the parking garage. Something about their movements, deliberate, predatory, sent a chill down her spine. "Dios mío," she whispered, reaching for her phone. Having witnessed countless courthouse dramas unfold, Maria knew when something wasn't right. Her fingers moved quickly, dialing Judge Nadine Richards' chambers. Thomas reached his car, fumbling with his keys while balancing his briefcase and a stack of legal pads. The sound of footsteps behind him barely registered until a voice cut through his thoughts. "Hey, counselor, got a minute?" Thomas turned to find Officers Daniels and Walsh approaching, their faces tight with barely contained anger. He'd seen that look before, in the courtroom when the verdict came down, in the hallways when he passed the thin blue line supporters. His heart rate quickened, but his face remained calm. "Officers, can I help you with something?" Thomas placed his briefcase on the roof of his car, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Yeah. You can explain how it feels to throw good cops under the bus for doing their jobs," Daniel said, stepping uncomfortably close. "Must be nice sitting in your fancy office, never having to make split-second decisions in the field." Walsh circled to Thomas's other side. "We know people like you. Come from nowhere, don't understand how things work, then tear down the system that keeps everyone safe." The implied meaning behind people like you wasn't lost on Thomas. He'd heard similar coded language throughout his career. His mind raced through options: engage, ignore, or try to de-escalate. Experience had taught him that showing fear often made these situations worse. "I respect the difficult job police officers do," Thomas replied evenly. "But this case wasn't about good cops. It was about abuse of power and racial profiling. The evidence was clear." "Evidence?" Daniels scoffed. "You mean that doctored video and those criminal witnesses with records longer than my arm?" Thomas felt a flutter of unease in his stomach as he realized the 2 officers had effectively backed him against his car. The parking garage was surprisingly empty for this time of day. He discreetly pressed the emergency call button on his phone in his pocket, a habit he'd developed after receiving threats during another high-profile case. "Look, I'm just doing my job same as you claim to be doing yours," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. The jury made their decision based on facts. 12 ordinary citizens saw what happened and agreed it was wrong. Walsh leaned in closer. "We know where you live, counselor. Nice place in Highland Park, right? Beautiful family. Would be a shame if something happened and no cops were available to respond." The threat hung in the air between them. Thomas felt his mouth go dry, but years of courtroom battles had taught him to maintain his composure under pressure. "Are you threatening a deputy attorney general? Because that would be incredibly unwise," Thomas said, looking Walsh directly in the eyes. Daniels laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the concrete structure. No threats here. Just sharing some concerns about neighborhood safety. Crime's up everywhere these days. Back in the courthouse, Maria Torres was frantically explaining what she'd seen to Judge Richards' assistant. Please, she needs to know right now. Those officers followed Mr. Lee into the garage, the same ones from the case. This doesn't look right. Judge Nadine Richards was preparing to leave for the day when her assistant burst in, phone in hand, explaining the situation. The judge's expression darkened immediately. She'd presided over the entire trial and had noticed the increasing hostility from certain officers in the gallery. She'd even considered requesting additional security, but had hoped professional boundaries would prevail. Call security immediately, she instructed her assistant, already gathering her robe. A judge appearing outside the courtroom in full robes was unusual, but Nadine understood the power of symbols. Tell them to meet me at the parking garage. Now. As Judge Richards rushed down the corridor, her heart pounded against her ribs. After 20 years on the bench, she recognized dangerous situations brewing. Officers retaliating against prosecutors happened more often than the public realized, usually through subtle means, evidence that disappeared, witnesses who suddenly changed their stories, cases that mysteriously fell apart. But direct intimidation? That crossed every line. In the garage, the confrontation was escalating. A few other courthouse employees had noticed the situation and stood at a distance, uncertain whether to intervene. You know what your problem is? Daniels was saying, jabbing a finger toward Thomas's chest. You play the race card because you can't win on facts. Those officers were doing their job in a high-crime area. The victim was a respected doctor returning from a hospital shift, Thomas replied, his patience wearing thin. The only crime was driving while black in an expensive car. Oh, here we go again with the racism talk, Walsh said, rolling his eyes. Always the same story with you people. You people? Thomas repeated, his voice hardening. And what exactly do you mean by that, Officer Walsh? The tension was interrupted by the sound of rapid footsteps and the swish of fabric. All three men turned to see Judge Richards approaching, her black robe billowing behind her like a storm cloud, court security officers following in her wake. The sight was so unexpected that Officer Daniels actually took a step back. Walsh straightened his posture instinctively, the ingrained response to authority momentarily overriding his anger. What exactly is happening here? Judge Richards demanded, her voice carrying the same authority it held in her courtroom. Despite her commanding tone, those who knew her well would have noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the widening of her eyes, signs of the panic she was desperately trying to control. For Thomas Lee, the judge's arrival felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. For Officers Daniels and Walsh, it was the sudden, unwelcome realization that their actions had just gained a very credible witness, one with the power to hold them in contempt. And for Judge Richards herself, standing there in the dimly lit parking garage, it was the moment she realized that the system she had dedicated her life to upholding was far more fragile than she had ever allowed herself to believe. The security officers fanned out behind her, their presence changing the dynamic instantly. One of them, hand resting casually near his holster, locked eyes with Officer Daniels in silent communication. Your Honor, Thomas said, relief evident in his voice. I was just leaving when Officers Daniels and Walsh approached me to discuss the case. Judge Richards surveyed the scene, noting Thomas's position backed against his car, the officers' aggressive stances, and the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered at a safe distance. Is that right, officers? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. You were just having a friendly discussion about a case this court has just ruled on? The moment hung in the balance, a turning point that would set in motion events none of them could fully predict, testing the boundaries between justice, loyalty, and the raw human emotions that sometimes overwhelmed both. The silence in the parking garage seemed to stretch forever. Officer Daniels was the first to recover, his face shifting from surprise to a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Evening, Your Honor, he said, taking another step back and adjusting his belt. Just having a professional conversation with Mr. Lee here about the case. Judge Richards' gaze moved between the two officers, taking in their defensive postures and the subtle signs of aggression. Walsh's clenched jaw, Daniel's hand resting too casually near his weapon. A professional conversation, she repeated, her tone making it clear she didn't believe a word. In a nearly empty parking garage after hours with the Deputy Attorney General backed against his car, Thomas stood a little straighter, finding his voice again. They were expressing some concerns about the verdict, Your Honor. Is that right? Judge Richards kept her eyes on the officers. Because from where I was standing it looked like intimidation of a state official. Officer Walsh's face flushed red. With all due respect, Judge, you're misreading the situation. We have every right to speak with the prosecutor about a case that's been decided. Judge Richards cut him off. About a verdict delivered by a jury of 12 citizens? About official misconduct that's now a matter of public record? The security officers moved a step closer, sensing the tension. One of them, Officer Rodriguez, had served in the courthouse for 15 years. He'd seen Judge Richards handle the most volatile situations with calm precision, but tonight something was different. The slight tremble in her usually steady hands, the higher pitch of her voice, she was rattled. Thomas noticed it too. The judge's normal composure was cracking around the edges. He'd argued dozens of cases before her, and knew her reputation for being unflappable. Seeing her unnerved only heightened his own sense of danger. Your Honor, Thomas said quietly, I was just leaving. Perhaps we should all call it a day. That sounds wise, Judge Richards agreed, never taking her eyes off the two police officers. Officers Daniels and Walsh, I believe your shift must be ending as well. Daniels smiled thinly. Actually, we're just starting our patrol. Lots of important work to do out there, keeping the streets safe. He emphasized the last words with a pointed look at Thomas. The threat wasn't subtle. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. I'll walk you to your car, Mr. Lee, Judge Richards said firmly. Court security will accompany us. Walsh stepped forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You know, Judge, this isn't how things should work. We're all supposed to be on the same side, law and order. But lately it seems like the courts have forgotten which side that is. Judge Richards drew herself up to her full height, which was still considerably shorter than Walsh, but her authority filled the space between them. Officer Walsh, the courts are not on any side. We uphold the law, which applies equally to everyone, including police officers. That's not a political stance. It's the foundation of our legal system. Pretty words, Daniels muttered. Tell that to the good cops who can't do their jobs anymore because they're afraid of ending up like Martinez and Johnson. He named the officers convicted in the case Thomas had just won. Thomas couldn't stay silent at that. Those good cops beat a man unconscious for a broken taillight, then planted evidence to justify it. The dash cam footage was clear. Their own sergeant testified against them. Daniels took a half step toward Thomas, but Officer Rodriguez moved between them smoothly. That's enough. This conversation is over. Officers, I suggest you continue your patrol elsewhere. For a moment it seemed like Daniels might escalate further, but Walsh put a hand on his partner's shoulder. We've made our point. Let's go. As they turned to leave, Walsh looked back at Thomas. Hope you sleep well, counselor. Tough world out there, never know what might happen. The two officers walked away, their footsteps echoing in the concrete structure. Only when they had disappeared around the corner did Thomas realize he'd been holding his breath. Judge Richards let out a long, shaky sigh. Are you all right, Mr. Lee? I am now, Thomas said, though his heart was still racing. Thank you for your intervention, Your Honor. I don't think they were going to leave on their own. The judge nodded, her face grave. I've been on the bench for 20 years, Mr. Lee. I've sentenced murderers, gang leaders, and corrupt politicians. But nothing frightens me more than law enforcement officers who believe they're above the law. She glanced at the security team. Officer Rodriguez, please escort Mr. Lee to his car and follow him until he's safely out of the area. Rodriguez nodded. Yes, Your Honor, and what about you? I'll be fine, she said, though she didn't sound convinced. I need to make some calls. Thomas gathered his belongings from where they'd scattered on the ground during the confrontation. Judge Richards, those threats weren't just aimed at me. They mentioned you as well, indirectly. You should have security tonight. The judge's expression hardened. This isn't my first difficult case, Mr. Lee, but you're right, we should all be cautious. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling the chief judge and the sheriff's department. This has gone beyond professional disagreement. As they walked toward their vehicles, Thomas replayed the confrontation in his mind. They knew where I live, he said quietly. They mentioned my neighborhood by name. Judge Richards stopped walking. That's direct intimidation. We need to document everything that happened here. She looked around the garage. Are there security cameras? Rodriguez pointed toward the ceiling. 2, but this section has a blind spot. That's probably why they chose this location. Of course it is, Thomas said bitterly. They know how to avoid leaving evidence. It's their job. Back in her chambers, Judge Richards paced as she spoke on the phone with Chief Judge Wilson. Her hands were still shaking as she described the incident. No, Harold, this wasn't just officers blowing off steam. This was calculated intimidation. They followed the deputy AG into the garage and cornered him. They mentioned his home address. She paused, listening. Yes, I'm sure. I saw it with my own eyes. She stopped at her window, looking out at the darkening sky. I understand the sensitivity, but we can't ignore this. If they're willing to threaten a deputy attorney general and make veiled threats to a sitting judge, where does it stop? The chief judge's cautious response made her grip the phone tighter. With respect, sir, I disagree. Waiting until morning gives them time to coordinate their stories. We need to act now. After hanging up, she sank into her chair, suddenly feeling every one of her 58 years. The chief judge had advised caution, suggested that perhaps she had misinterpreted the situation. Police are under a lot of pressure these days, he'd said. Let's not escalate things unnecessarily. The knock on her door made her jump. Maria Torres, the clerk who had first spotted the trouble, entered with a cup of tea. I thought you might need this, Judge, Maria said, placing the cup on the desk. Are you okay? Everyone's talking about what happened in the garage. Judge Richards managed a weak smile. News travels fast. It's not just news, Maria said, lowering her voice. People are worried. This isn't the first time officers from that precinct have caused problems. Last month, they surrounded a defense attorney's car after he won an excessive force case. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Why wasn't this reported? Maria shrugged. The attorney said it wouldn't go anywhere, that it would just make things worse. She hesitated, then added, he was probably right. Judge Richards stared into her tea. The system she had dedicated her life to suddenly seemed fragile, riddled with cracks she had either never noticed or had chosen to ignore. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Home safe, but squad car parked across the street. Not sure if protection or surveillance, she typed back quickly. Document everything. I'm meeting with the chief judge and DA tomorrow morning. This isn't over. As she gathered her things to leave, Judge Richards felt a weight of responsibility she hadn't anticipated when she'd rushed to the parking garage. What had started as an instinctive response to protect a fellow officer of the court had become something much larger, a test of the system itself. And despite her years on the bench, despite all her experience and authority, she wasn't entirely sure the system would pass that test. Morning arrived with a pale, watery light filtering through the blinds of Judge Richards's bedroom. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the parking garage confrontation in an endless loop. The look in Officer Daniel's eyes, not just anger, but absolute certainty that he was untouchable, had haunted her dreams. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Squad car finally left at 3 a.m., meeting with Attorney General at 9. Will you be there? She texted back quickly. Yes, Chief Judge Wilson arranged it. See you then. As she dressed for the day, choosing her most formal suit, armor in its own way, Judge Richards thought about what she would say. In 20 years on the bench, she had developed a reputation for fairness and restraint. She believed in the system, in its ability to correct itself when flaws were exposed, but yesterday had shaken that belief to its core. Across town, Thomas was having a similar morning. He'd spent half the night checking his security cameras, making sure his home alarm was set, jumping at every sound. The other half he'd spent documenting everything that had happened, writing down every word he could remember from the officer's threats. His wife, Linda, placed a cup of coffee in front of him at the kitchen table. You need to call your brother, she said quietly. Thomas looked up from his notes. Why? Because he's a reporter, and if something happens to you, I want someone outside the system to know why. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Thomas reached for her hand. Nothing's going to happen to me. You don't know that, she said. You've told me yourself how these things work, how officers protect their own, how complaints disappear, how witnesses suddenly change their stories. He couldn't argue with her. As a prosecutor specializing in official misconduct, he had seen the pattern too many times. I'll call him after the meeting with the AG. At precisely 9 o'clock, Thomas walked into the Attorney General's conference room. Judge Richards was already there, along with Chief Judge Wilson, Attorney General Patel, and the Police Commissioner, Raymond Clark. Thomas wasn't surprised to see Clark. He had expected the police department to have representation, but the man's hostile glare made it clear this wouldn't be an easy conversation. Mr. Lee, Attorney General Patel gestured to an empty chair. Thank you for joining us. Judge Richards has been explaining the situation. Thomas nodded, taking the seat. Has she mentioned that Officers Daniels and Walsh knew my home address? That they specifically referenced Highland Park, where I live with my family? Commissioner Clark cleared his throat. If I may, my officers report a very different version of events. They say they simply approached Mr. Lee to express their professional disappointment with how the case was handled, and he became confrontational. Judge Richards's eyebrows shot up. That is absolutely false. I witnessed the end of the confrontation myself. Mr. Lee was backed against his car, surrounded by 2 officers who were clearly intimidating him. With respect, Your Honor, Clark said, his tone suggesting very little respect indeed. You arrived at the end of the interaction. You didn't see how it began. I saw enough, Judge Richards replied firmly, and the courthouse clerk who alerted me saw the officers follow Mr. Lee into the garage with clear intent. Chief Judge Wilson raised his hands in a calming gesture. Let's all take a step back. We're here to address a serious allegation of intimidation against a deputy attorney general and implied threats against a sitting judge. Commissioner Clark, regardless of how the interaction began, do you find it appropriate for your officers to mention Mr. Lee's home address in what you call a professional conversation? Clark shifted uncomfortably. If that happened, and I'm not saying it did, then no, it would not be appropriate. But these are decorated officers with exemplary records. Thomas couldn't stay silent at that. Commissioner, Officer Daniels has 17 complaints in his file, including 3 for excessive force against minorities. Officer Walsh has been involved in 6 shootings, twice the department average, and has been named in 2 civil rights lawsuits that the city settled. I wouldn't call those records exemplary. The room fell silent. Attorney General Patel looked at Commissioner Clark with raised eyebrows, waiting for his response. Clark's face flushed red. Those complaints were investigated and found to be without merit. The settlements were business decisions, not admissions of guilt. We're getting off track, Chief Judge Wilson interrupted. The issue at hand is the incident in the parking garage and how to address it. Judge Richards leaned forward. I want a formal investigation, independent of the police department's internal affairs. These officers need to be suspended pending the outcome. Commissioner Clark shot to his feet. That's completely unwarranted. You're talking about damaging the careers of 2 officers based on an unsubstantiated claim. Unsubstantiated? Thomas said incredulously. There were multiple witnesses, including a sitting judge. A judge who has shown clear bias against law enforcement in her rulings, Clark shot back. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Judge Richards slowly stood, her voice dangerously quiet. Commissioner, are you accusing me of judicial bias? Because that's a serious charge that you'd better be prepared to substantiate. Attorney General Patel intervened before Clark could respond. No one is accusing anyone of bias. We're trying to resolve a situation before it escalates further. She turned to Thomas. Did you file a formal complaint about the incident? I submitted it last night, Thomas confirmed. I also have a recording of part of the conversation. All eyes turned to him. Even Judge Richards looked surprised. A recording? Chief Judge Wilson asked. Thomas nodded. After receiving threats during a previous case, I installed an app that records when I press the emergency button on my phone. I activated it when the officers approached me. Commissioner Clark's expression changed from anger to calculation. And this recording, does it capture the entire interaction? It starts about 30 seconds after they approached me, Thomas said. But it includes the most relevant parts, including their reference to my home address and their suggestion that police might not respond if something happened to my family. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. Would you like to hear it? Without waiting for an answer, he pressed play. The voices filled the conference room, slightly muffled but clear enough to understand. We know where you live, counselor. Nice place in Highland Park, right? Beautiful family. Would be a shame if something happened and no cops were available to respond. Thomas's voice. Are you threatening a deputy attorney general? Because that would be incredibly unwise. Daniel's laugh, harsh and dismissive. No threats here. Just sharing some concerns about neighborhood safety. Crime's up everywhere these days. The recording continued, capturing the escalating tension until Judge Richards arrived. When it ended, the silence in the room was heavy. Attorney General Patel was the first to speak. Commissioner Clark, I believe we need that independent investigation Judge Richards requested. Clark's face had gone from red to pale. I'd like to hear the officer's side before. Their side is on the recording, Judge Richards cut in. What more do you need to hear? Clark stood up, gathering his papers. This isn't over. Those officers have rights and the police union will ensure they're protected. As they should be, Thomas said evenly. Everyone deserves due process. That's what the system is supposed to guarantee. But that same system needs to protect those who uphold the law from intimidation and threats. After Clark stormed out, Attorney General Patel turned to Thomas and Judge Richards. This is going to get ugly. The police union is powerful and they don't like their members being challenged. So we just let it go? Judge Richards asked. Pretend it never happened until next time, when maybe they do more than make threats? Chief Judge Wilson sighed heavily. No one is suggesting that. But we need to be strategic. The last thing we want is to turn this into a media circus that undermines public trust in both the courts and law enforcement. Thomas thought of his wife's fear, of the squad car watching his house all night. With respect, Your Honor, public trust is already undermined when officers believe they can threaten prosecutors and judges without consequences. As the meeting broke up, Judge Richards pulled Thomas aside. That recording was smart thinking. It might not be enough, Thomas admitted. You heard the commissioner. They'll close ranks. The judge's expression was grim but determined. Then we'll need to be prepared for what comes next. Because this isn't just about us anymore. It's about whether the system can police itself. As they walked out of the building, neither noticed the unmarked car across the street or the officer inside taking photos of them leaving together. Evidence being gathered for a different kind of case, one built on retaliation rather than justice. By the next morning, news of the confrontation had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Thomas arrived to find whispered conversations stopping as he passed, colleagues offering supportive nods or avoiding eye contact entirely. The battle lines were being drawn and everyone was choosing sides. His assistant, Joey, met him at the door with a stack of messages. The press has been calling nonstop. Someone leaked the story. Thomas wasn't surprised. Any idea who? Joey shook his head. Could have been anyone in that meeting yesterday. Or the officers themselves trying to control the narrative. What are they saying? Thomas asked, dreading the answer. It's mixed. Some outlets are reporting it straight. Deputy AG threatened by officers after misconduct case. Others are spinning it as tensions between law enforcement and overzealous prosecutors. Joey handed him a printout of headlines. The police union released a statement defending the officers and suggesting you're exaggerating the encounter for political reasons. Thomas scanned the headlines, his stomach sinking. The union statement was particularly troubling. These dedicated officers approached Mr. Lee to express legitimate concerns about the handling of a case that unfairly targeted their colleagues. Any suggestion of threats is a gross mischaracterization designed to further Mr. Lee's clear anti-police agenda. His phone buzzed with a text from Judge Richards. Have you seen the news? We need to talk. My chambers, 10 a.m. When Thomas arrived at Judge Richards's chambers, he found her pacing behind her desk, the morning newspapers spread out before her. Her usual calm demeanor had given way to barely contained fury. They're already controlling the story, she said without preamble. The union has half the city believing you're an anti-police crusader who misinterpreted a professional conversation. Thomas nodded grimly. I saw. Have you heard anything about the investigation? That's why I called you here. Judge Richards sat down heavily. Chief Judge Wilson called this morning. The independent investigation we requested? It's been put on administrative hold pending a review of procedures. Administrative hold? Thomas repeated. What does that even mean? It means someone got to Wilson, Judge Richards said bluntly. The police commissioner, the mayor's office, someone with enough power to make him reconsider rocking the boat. Thomas felt a surge of anger. So they threaten a prosecutor, intimidate a judge, and face no consequences because the system is too afraid to hold them accountable? I didn't say I was giving up. Judge Richards replied, her voice steely. But we need to be smart about this. The recording is our strongest evidence, but even that's being spun as taken out of context. Thomas paced the office, thinking, what about the media? My brother's a reporter at the Tribune. If we go public with the full story, and that's exactly what they want, Judge Richards cut in. Turn this into a public battle, police versus prosecutors, with both sides claiming victimhood. It undermines the entire justice system and solves nothing. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maria Torres entered, looking anxious. I'm sorry to interrupt, Your Honor, but there's someone here you both need to speak with. She stepped aside to reveal a young police officer, still in uniform, shifting nervously from foot to foot. This is Officer Ramirez. He says it's urgent. Officer Ramirez glanced over his shoulder before entering the room. Can we close the door, please? Once the door was shut, he spoke in a low, hurried voice. I shouldn't be here. If anyone finds out... He took a deep breath. I work at the same precinct as Daniels and Walsh. I was there last night when they came back from their shift, bragging about putting you both in your place. Thomas and Judge Richards exchanged glances. You heard them discussing the garage incident? Thomas asked carefully. Ramirez nodded. That and more. They were planning how to handle the situation now that you've filed a complaint. Daniel said he has friends in internal affairs who would make sure the investigation went nowhere. Walsh suggested they might need to send a stronger message to make sure you both learned your lesson. Judge Richards leaned forward. Officer Ramirez, would you be willing to make a formal statement about what you heard? The young officer paled. I can't. You don't understand what would happen to me. They'd know it was me, and then... He shook his head. I'd never work in law enforcement again. Best case scenario. Then why come to us at all? Thomas asked. Because this isn't right, Ramirez said simply. I became a cop to help people, not to terrorize them. What they're doing, it's not what the badge is supposed to stand for. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I recorded some of their conversation last night. It's not much, but it proves they're targeting you deliberately. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. But I couldn't just do nothing. Thomas took the recorder, feeling its weight in his palm. Officer Ramirez, you're taking a huge risk coming here. I know. He straightened his shoulders. But I have to look at myself in the mirror every morning. My father was a cop and his father before him. They taught me that the badge means something, that it's about service, not power. After Ramirez left, Thomas connected the recorder to Judge Richards' computer. The audio was grainy but clear enough to make out Daniels' voice. Lee thinks he's untouchable with that recording, but it's his word against ours on how it started. We just need to stick to the story. Walsh's voice followed. What about the judge? She's the real problem. Without her backing him up, this goes away. I've got some dirt on Richards from a buddy in Vice, Daniels replied. Nothing solid, but enough to raise questions about her impartiality. By the time we're done, the public won't know who to believe, and the department will close ranks. Thomas stopped the recording, his face grim. They're not just covering their tracks. They're planning a counterattack. Judge Richards nodded, her expression equally serious. They're going to try to discredit us both. Make this about our credibility rather than their actions. Standard playbook, Thomas agreed. When you can't deny the accusation, attack the accuser. He tapped the recorder. But this changes things. Now we have evidence of a conspiracy to obstruct an official investigation, which we can't use without exposing Officer Ramirez, Judge Richards pointed out. Thomas paced the office again, thinking out loud. Maybe we don't need to. Maybe just knowing their strategy gives us an advantage. He turned to face the judge. We need to get ahead of whatever dirt Daniels claims to have on you. Judge Richards waved a dismissive hand. There is no dirt. I've been on the bench for 20 years with an unblemished record. It doesn't have to be real, Thomas countered. Just plausible enough to create doubt. Was there anything in that Martinez and Johnson case that they could twist? Any rulings that could be portrayed as unfairly biased against the officers? The judge thought for a moment. I did exclude some evidence the defense wanted to introduce about the victim's prior record. It wasn't relevant to the traffic stop and the law was clear. Her eyes widened in realization. That's it. They'll claim I kept out evidence that would have helped their case, that I was prejudiced against the officers from the start. Exactly, Thomas said. And for me, they'll focus on my record of prosecuting police misconduct cases, paint me as having a vendetta. They were interrupted by Thomas's phone ringing. It was Joey, his voice tense. "You need to get back here now. Internal Affairs just arrived with a warrant for your case files on Martinez and Johnson. All of them, including your personal notes." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "On what grounds?" "They're saying it's part of their investigation into your complaint, but something's not right." The warrant is signed by Judge Franklin. Judge Richards frowned at the name. "Franklin?" "He's a former prosecutor who specialized in defending police officers before he was appointed to the bench. He's also Commissioner Clark's golfing buddy." Thomas ended the call, his mind racing. "They're moving faster than we expected. They want my notes to see what we have, what we know." "This is about more than just covering up threats now," Judge Richards said slowly. "They're trying to undermine the original case. If they can find any procedural errors or suggest prosecutorial misconduct, they could file for a mistrial." The realization hit them both at the same time. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. It was about overturning the verdict against Martinez and Johnson, erasing the accountability that Thomas had fought so hard to secure. As Thomas rushed back to his office, Judge Richards placed a call to Chief Judge Wilson. She was done playing politics. It was time to make a stand, even if it meant standing alone. Across town, in a dimly lit bar frequented by off-duty police officers, Daniels and Walsh sat in a corner booth with Commissioner Clark, speaking in hushed tones. The commissioner looked troubled. "You've created a mess," he told them, "but we'll clean it up. Just stick to the script and let me handle the politics." Walsh nodded, but Daniels seemed less convinced. "What if the recording spreads? What if there are other witnesses?" Clark's expression hardened. "Then we make sure no one believes them. One way or another, this ends now." The courthouse steps were packed with reporters by noon. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. The confrontation between law enforcement and the justice system had become the biggest story in the city. Thomas stood at his office window, watching the circus below. He had managed to delay the Internal Affairs officers by questioning the scope of their warrant, but it was a temporary victory at best. They would be back, and next time they'd be prepared for his legal objections. His phone buzzed with a message from Judge Richards. "Attorney General's office, 1 p.m. Bring everything you have. A.G. Patel is finally taking this seriously." Hope flickered in his chest for the first time in days. The Attorney General had the authority to override local politics and force a genuine investigation. If Patel was truly willing to step in, they might have a chance. As Thomas gathered his files, Joey knocked on his door. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Thomas looked up to find Maria Torres, Judge Richards' clerk, standing in his doorway, slightly out of breath. "Mr. Lee, you need to come with me right now. Something's happened." Her tone sent a chill through him. "What is it?" "Is Judge Richards okay?" "She's fine, but—" Maria glanced over her shoulder and lowered her voice. "Officer Ramirez was just brought into the emergency room. He was beaten badly during a so-called training exercise at the precinct." Thomas felt sick. "How bad?" "Broken ribs, concussion. He'll survive, but he's asking for you and the judge. Says he needs to tell you something before—" She stopped herself. "He's scared, Mr. Lee, really scared." Thomas grabbed his coat. "Let's go." At the hospital, they found Judge Richards already waiting outside Ramirez's room, her face tight with anger. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," she said as Thomas approached. This was a message to him and to anyone else who might think about crossing the blue line. A doctor emerged from the room. "He can see you now, but keep it brief. He needs rest." Ramirez looked small in the hospital bed, his face swollen, one eye completely closed. He tried to sit up as they entered, but winced in pain. "Don't move," Thomas said gently. "Maria said you needed to tell us something." Ramirez nodded slightly. "They know I talked to you. Don't know how, but they do." His voice was a raspy whisper. "Daniels was there during the training exercise. Said to tell you that accidents happen to everyone, judges, prosecutors, their families. Said next time it wouldn't be a warning." Judge Richards' face paled. "Officer Ramirez, we need to get you protection." He gave a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "From who? The police?" He shook his head slightly. "I'm done. Turning in my badge once I can walk again. But before I go—" He reached for the water cup on his bedside table, wincing with the effort. Thomas helped him take a sip. As he leaned close, Ramirez whispered, "Check my locker at the precinct. Number 2 on 27, the combination is 103183. There's a flash drive taped inside my helmet. 6 months of dash cam footage Daniels and Walsh didn't know I saved, including what really happened the night they arrested Dr. Jackson. Thomas's eyes widened. Dr. Jackson was the victim in the case against Martinez and Johnson, the original case that had started all of this. You were there that night? Backup unit, Ramirez confirmed. Arrived after the worst of it, but my dashcam caught Daniels coaching Martinez and Johnson on their story while the victim was still lying on the ground. Caught Walsh planting the gun they claimed to find in the doctor's car. Judge Richards leaned forward. Why didn't you come forward during the trial? Ramirez's unswollen eye filled with shame. I was afraid. Told myself it wasn't my case, not my problem. He looked at his battered body. Guess I'm paying for that now. A nurse appeared in the doorway. He needs to rest. As they left the room, Thomas and Judge Richards exchanged looks of grim determination. We need that flash drive, Thomas said. And we need to get to the Attorney General, Judge Richards added. Now we have proof this goes beyond 2 officers. It's a pattern of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of the department. Outside the hospital, they split up. Judge Richards to meet with A.G. Patel, Thomas to somehow retrieve the flash drive from a police precinct where he was now considered an enemy. He called the one person he knew could help. Joey, I need a favor. A big one. 2 hours later, Thomas walked into the Attorney General's office, flash drive in hand. Judge Richards was already there with A.G. Patel, along with 2 state police officers and, surprisingly, Chief Judge Wilson. You got it, Judge Richards said, relief evident in her voice. Thomas nodded, handing the drive to one of the state officers. Joey has a cousin who works maintenance at the precinct. He got in and out without anyone noticing. A.G. Patel gestured for everyone to sit. While we wait for the technical team to verify the contents of the drive, let me update you. Based on Officer Ramirez's statement and the recording you provided earlier, I've opened a state-level investigation into Officers Daniels and Walsh, as well as possible broader corruption within the precinct. Chief Judge Wilson cleared his throat awkwardly. I owe you both an apology. I allowed political pressure to cloud my judgment. When I heard about what happened to Officer Ramirez, he shook his head. This has gone far beyond a simple dispute. It was never a simple dispute, Judge Richards said, her voice cool. It was about whether we have one system of justice for everyone, or different rules for those with badges. The door opened, and a technician entered with a laptop. We've verified the contents, ma'am. The footage matches Officer Ramirez's description. It's quite damning. A.G. Patel nodded. Show us. The video played on the large screen on the wall. The night scene was lit by flashing police lights as Daniels spoke to Martinez and Johnson beside a car with its door open. A man, Dr. Jackson, lay handcuffed on the ground, his face bloody. The audio was clear. Stick to the story. He reached under the seat. You thought you saw a gun, you reacted. Keep it simple. Then Walsh, looking around before reaching into his jacket and placing something in the car. The camera zoomed in as he adjusted his position. A gun, being carefully placed under the driver's seat. When the video ended, the room was silent. Finally, A.G. Patel spoke. This changes everything. Not just for your case, Mr. Lee, but potentially for dozens of arrests these officers were involved in. What happens now? Thomas asked. Now, Patel said, we clean house. State police will execute search warrants on the precinct tonight. Commissioner Clark will be brought in for questioning. And Officers Daniels and Walsh will be arrested. Not just for the corruption captured on this video, but for assault, intimidation, and conspiracy. Outside, as the sun began to set, Thomas and Judge Richards stood on the steps of the state building. It's not over, Thomas said. The police union will fight this every step of the way. There will be pushback, threats. Judge Richards nodded. Of course. Systems don't change easily, especially when the people in power have everything to lose. She looked at him. Are you prepared for what comes next? The trials, the media, the pressure? Thomas thought of Ramirez in his hospital bed, of Dr. Jackson's bloodied face on the pavement, of his wife's fear for his safety. Someone has to stand up, he said simply. If not us, then who? As they walked down the steps, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions overlapping in a chaotic chorus. Thomas raised his hand for quiet. We believe in the rule of law, he said clearly. We believe that no one, No matter their position, their power, or their badge is above that law. What happens next will test that belief, but we stand firm in our commitment to justice. A reporter called out, "Aren't you afraid of retaliation?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Judge Richards before answering, "Of course we are. But as a wise young officer reminded me recently, sometimes doing the right thing means being afraid and moving forward anyway." As the questions continued, Thomas felt his phone buzz with a text from Linda. "Saw you on the news. So proud of you. Stay safe." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, knowing that the hardest part of this journey was still ahead. The system was broken in places, corrupted by those who confused power with righteousness. But today, at least, they had proven it could still work when good people refused to look away from injustice, when they found the courage to stand up and say, "Enough." Judge Richards caught his eye and gave him a slight nod. They had started this fight together in a darkened parking garage, strangers united by circumstance and principle. They would finish it the same way, side by side, guided by the belief that justice, though imperfect and difficult, was still worth fighting for.